The Golden State Warriors have sat atop the NBA's hierarchy for a decade now. Within the last 10 years, the Warriors have made it to the finals 6 separate times, having won 4 titles. It started in 2015 when they won their first. Then they signed Kevin Durant and went back-to-back in 2017 and 18. But the dynasty looked to be dead until the Warriors won one more in 2022. Not many teams can say they've won 4 titles within an 8-year stretch. Without a doubt, one of the most impressive dynasties in sports history, let alone the NBA. But since their most recent title, everything has fallen apart. It starts that following training camp with the punch, ending Jordan Poole's tenure with the Warriors. That following trade deadline, the experiment with former number 2 pick James Wiseman was over. The following offseason, Bob Myers, the architect for the Warriors dynasty, stepped down. That following season, Golden State didn't even make the playoffs, with Klay Thompson infamously going 0 for 10 in the play-in game, causing him to leave the Warriors and signing with the Dallas Mavericks. It has been a tumultuous past 2 years for the Warriors. They sat atop the NBA, and now everything has completely fallen apart. Stephen Curry will be turning 37 years old this season, and we're going to have to figure out his long-term future. Are we able to contend for one more title with Steph? Are we going to start a rebuild with Steph, or could he possibly be traded away? There are so many different avenues we can take with this roster, which is ultimately the reason why I picked them for this series. Can we bring the Warriors back atop the NBA landscape? Will it be with Steph Curry still on the roster, or will we tear things down and start fresh? Welcome everybody to the very first episode of the Golden State Warriors, my NBA franchise, here on NBA 2K25. I'm very excited to get this show on the road, and I hope you guys are as well. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new for more MyNBA franchise content. I've got some fun stuff on the horizon over the next couple of weeks with this series and some other MyNBA videos, so hope you guys are ready. It's a little bit ironic that we're picking the Warriors this year because, of course, the Steph era has just been put into the game. That starts in 2016, the year that I begun making content here on YouTube, which is now 8 years ago. Now, obviously, the NBA's landscape has changed a lot, specifically this Warriors team, who had 490-plus overalls at the time, but now only 3 players from this roster remain on the modern-day Warriors. This team has gotten older, they've gotten, obviously, quite a bit worse, not even making the playoffs last year, and now we have to figure out what's next. So I do want to point out that I will be making my own custom rosters for this series, very similar to the Madden franchise that I begun last month. I want every franchise to feel unique and different. I'm going to be messing around with a lot of the player potentials and their peak ages. That way, different players end up developing in different MyNBA saves because it always feels like the same players make the All-Star teams 5 years into the future, and I want a unique and different experience. I also wanted a different experience in terms of choosing the team. Normally, I pick a rebuilding team. Obviously, last year we went with the Blazers, and obviously the Warriors are not some traditional rebuild. Steph Curry is still at minimum one of the 6 or 7 best players in the NBA, and this team is still expected to contend at the very least to make a push in the Western Conference playoffs. And if they were to acquire a second star, they'd theoretically be right up there with some of the other teams in the West competing for a title. Draft class, I want to talk about this as well. If you've been around the channel, you guys know that I let my subscribers make custom players in my Discord server. The link to that is in the description. And the draft classes are all subscriber players, which end up being really fun seeing their careers unfold. We have pretty much all of our draft picks, so we do have pick flexibility, but we don't have extra picks like a lot of the other top young teams in the West, specifically Oklahoma City. Chris Paul will be holding a farewell tour. That's a new feature within the game this year. Warrior legend, Chris Paul, might I add. And with that, let's break down this roster and what ultimately this series may look like with this team. Obviously, the Warriors do not have one of the better teams right now in the Western Conference. Again, we do have some flexibility to where we can choose to rebuild. We can choose to get a second star and go all in on the end of Stephen Curry's career. And of course, Curry is the main draw here with the Warriors. Again, it's very rare where I'm going to pick a team with not just an established superstar on it, but somebody who's been one of the faces of the league over the last decade. But he's also one of the oldest players in the league, again, turning 37 years old later this season. There's not much that needs to be said about Stephen Curry's game. He is obviously a dynamic offensive player, the greatest shooter in the history of the NBA, and a major scoring threat every time he touches the ball. Given his skill set, there's no reason to think that he will regress over the next 2 to 3 years, and he should remain this team's leading scorer. We saw him take over in the gold medal game in the Olympics towards the end against France, where he looked like vintage 2015-2016 Stephen Curry, which leaves me to believe even more that Stephen Curry being elite is not going anywhere. But we're still going to have to figure out how we want to navigate the end of his career, because we want to do right by the greatest player in franchise history. Obviously, he wants to compete for a title in his waning years, and if we do choose to rebuild, that's probably not going to fit what he wants to do. So we're going to have to figure out if we keep him or if we possibly trade him. He's got 3 years left on his deal. He just recently agreed to a 1-year extension last week that hasn't been put into the game yet, but I will add it. So for now, we've got 3 more years of Steph. He'll be a free agent in 2027, and since he just agreed to the extension, obviously, it would not make any sense for us to trade him right now. If this season goes south and we end up as one of the worst teams in the Western Conference, which, given the question marks on this roster, that is possible, then there may be rumblings and discussions of a Stephen Curry trade. But for right now, he'll be staying on the team at least through this season. The only other remaining member of the Big Four here is Draymond Green. Obviously, Draymond is, well, how do I put this nicely? He's a wild card, not just off the floor, but on it as well. Any given moment, Draymond Green could kick your favorite player in the balls or give him a nice sucker punch to the face, especially if it's somebody he doesn't like. Obviously, Draymond is still a very valuable basketball player, and he has been the perfect role player for this team, given his IQ, his feel for the game as a playmaker, and his excellent defense. As immensely valuable as he has been to this dynasty, though, he's also a big reason why the dynasty has been killed off so quickly. From his punch to Jordan Poole, to his relationship with Kevin Durant towards the end, to all the other antics he's done, and some of his notable personality badges, as you can see. And that's not to mention that he's going to turn 35 years old this year. He's not getting any younger. As of now, Draymond has 3 years left on his deal with a team option for the final season. So for now, it looks like Draymond will be sticking around. But again, given his age, will he be a long-term piece of this future? And with his ability to go rogue at just about any given moment, things can change on a dime with him. I think Steph and Draymond are the only 2 clear starters on this team, though. Nobody else here is higher than an 81 overall. And it seems like any given week, Steve Kerr's doghouse can be filled up with 3 players he doesn't like. One day you can start, the next game you don't play. So because of that, we don't really have 3 other clear starters on this roster, and I think our lineups are going to be very matchup dependent. But nonetheless, we have to figure out the other 3 regular starters to begin the year. I think the plan is that at the 2 guard, we're going to roll with Buddy Hield. Now, obviously, he's going to have to play well with guys like Brendan Pajemski and DeAnthony Melton, both possibly looking to vie for his spot. And those guys will start, again, depending on the matchup. But I think Buddy Hield will be the regular starter at that spot. Hield was signed this offseason from the Philadelphia 76ers, and obviously he is known for his knockdown shooting ability. I think the rest of our lineup outside of Steph and Hield will have questionable spacing, and I wanted to get another knockdown shooter on the floor. Obviously, Steph is most dangerous with other guys who can space the floor. So I think having Buddy Hield share a lot of minutes with Steph Curry will be wise. It'll help make the offense run very efficiently. Hield signed a pretty long deal here, a 4-year contract with a team option for the last year. Being that he's 31 years old, I don't think he's going to regress too much into that contract, considering he really doesn't rely on athleticism to his game. It's mainly his jump shot. At the 3, we will likely regularly have Jonathan Kuminga at that spot. The 4th-year pro has had certainly an up-and-down start to his NBA career, but he really took a step up last year and looks like somebody who can be a long-term building block for this roster. I think outside of Stephen Curry, Jonathan Kuminga is the most valuable asset on this roster, and in my opinion is the best young player here. Going into last season, I was super high on Kuminga. I expected him to take a big step, and I was right. And I could see him taking another step this year. He's an athletic, efficient scorer who has shown some flashes with the outside shot, but for now is an explosive and dynamic finisher. I like what he provides defensively as well. He's got the quickness to guard players on the perimeter. He's got the size and length to battle with bigs down low. Now, Kuminga is on the last year of his contract, and given the season he had last year, and given the leap that I expect him to make this year, this is somebody who could be asking for close to, if not maximum contract type of money, and we're going to have to figure out if that's worth it for him. I definitely see Jonathan Kuminga as a building block for this team, but obviously he's got to have a good season, and from there, hopefully, we can get a contract done. At the 5, we're going to roll with the veteran Big Loon, Kevon Looney, but again, depending on the matchup, we may roll with Trace Jackson Davis. Looney has been here for a decade now, drafted in 2015, and the thing with Looney is his high energy, his motor, and his reliability. This is a guy who rarely misses games for this team and is very dependable. Looney is 6'9", which is tied for the tallest player on the roster, which that in and of itself is a concern with this team. He's a solid inside scorer, he's a tough physical defender, and he's a pretty good rebounder. But I'm not entirely sure if he has a long-term future on this roster, being that he is getting close to 30, he's on the last year of his contract, and realistically, I'd rather my long-term center be taller than 6'9". So again, I think those will be our 5 starters to open the year, but it'll be an open competition for a lot of those spots, and a guy who I think could challenge for a starting spot is the youngest player on this roster, Brennan Pajemski, the second-year pro out of Santa Clara, who had a really impressive rookie season last year. His feel for the game as a rookie was really impressive, and it's hard to find a guy in his first season who legitimately contributes to winning basketball, but that's exactly what Pajemski was able to do. Solid scoring, solid efficiency, really good rebounder, and a pretty solid playmaker. His court vision and passing ability is quite impressive, and I'm curious to see if he can be a long-term fit in the backcourt with Stephen Curry. Even though Buddy Hield is the starter there, obviously I'm hoping Pajemski is the regular starter at the 2 by the end of the year. I want to see him improve defensively, I want to see him improve as a finisher, but he's a good shooter, pretty good playmaker, and given his consistent development over the last few years, dating back to when he started at college at the University of Illinois, he has gotten considerably better year in and year out, and there's no reason to think that trajectory will not continue for Pajemski. A lot of great NBA players take that big leap in their third season, as we saw with Jonathan Kuminga, for instance. But with Pajemski, given his age and recent development, I think that leap could come this year. Along with Pods, another guy who I think is going to be getting big minutes off the bench pretty regularly and may be getting some starts depending on the matchup is former All-Star Andrew Wiggins. Obviously, Wiggins' career hasn't gone to plan. He was a very hyped-up number 1 pick out of Kansas. Rock chalk, and while Wiggins has been a productive NBA player, he's never been the superstar that a lot of people expected. Wiggins had probably the worst year of his career last year, and given his contract, that looks like one of the worst deals in the NBA. He's a negative trade asset right now, and because of that, we're probably going to have to keep him around until his contract is up. Now, I think we can get a better version out of Wiggins, maybe not the 2022 All-Star, but I certainly expect him to be better than he was last year. I know he's a lot more talented than that. He's got 3 years left on his deal, but he has a team option for the final season. Assuming his current play sticks, that's probably going to be declined. So we've probably got 2 more years of Andrew Wiggins, unless his career takes a big 180, which again, as a Jayhawk fan, I certainly hope it does. De'Anthony Melton's also going to be getting a lot of run off the bench, signed as well from the 76ers this offseason. I fully expect Melton to be a guy who bounces around over the next decade on a lot of championship contenders because he checks off pretty much all the boxes you look for in a backup point guard. Now, his scoring efficiency has been up and down throughout his career. Last year, he only shot 38% from the field, which is pretty low, but otherwise, he gives you what you look for in a backup point guard. Somebody who can put the ball on the floor, he can shoot the ball, he's a really good defender, and when we're playing against teams with microwave scorers off the bench, he's going to be the guy who guards them. I think he's also going to close a lot of games as well, again, because of his defense, and he's a good enough shooter to where he's not going to be a liability for us offensively. Now, Melton was only signed to a one-year deal, so I'm not sure if he's going to be a long-term piece here, but I think he's a good player to have. Along with those guys, I'm excited to see what we get out of Trayce Jackson-Davis, the second-year big man out of the University of Indiana. He was one of the final picks at the draft last year, but had a really good rookie season, all things considered, averaging around 8 points and 5 rebounds on good efficiency. Now, TJD is already 24 years old. It's not like he's got some super high ceiling or anything, but I think he can be a good role player for us. Similar to Kevon Looney, though, he's 6'9". He's not really built like a center. I'd rather my 5 be a little bit taller. I'd rather my 5 be a little bit better defensively in the post. And I feel like Trayce Jackson-Davis is a little bit of a tweener because he doesn't really have the size to match up with certain bigs, and he doesn't have the athleticism and quickness to hang on the perimeter. But nonetheless, I think he's a good scorer, and if he improves defensively, then I think he's going to be a major asset for us, whether that's as our starting center replacing Looney or coming off the bench. I think the 9 players we've gone over are very comfortably in our team's rotation, but we're going to have to figure out who rounds out the rotation. I think Kyle Anderson's going to have the upper hand, given that he was signed to a fairly big contract this past offseason. Anderson, of course, most known for his very slow jump shot. There's a reason why they call him Slow-Mo. Last year with the Wolves, he was very up and down in the playoffs. In some games, he was making big shots and really contributing, and then other moments, it looked like he was completely unplayable. But nonetheless, this team clearly has faith in him, given the 3-year, nearly $30 million contract that he signed. Anderson is a spotty, inconsistent shooter, but he's a really good playmaker, and I like what he provides as a defender. So because of that, I think realistically it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor, but there are going to be guys battling for those last spots on the bench. Moses Moody is definitely a guy who I'd like to get some good run. Moody's only 22 years old, entering his 4th season. I feel like when he's been given the opportunity, he's been a pretty good player. It's just that he has been stuck in the Steve Kerr doghouse over the last few years. Now, we're going to have to figure out if Moody is a long-term piece here, being that he will be a restricted free agent this offseason. But I like what he provides as a scorer, good three-point shooter, good defender. He can defend guys who are a lot bigger than him, so I think his versatility on that end of the floor is a major plus. Overall, I'm a huge fan of his skill set, and I really want to see Moses Moody become a long-term role player here, and he's a guy who I definitely want to give minutes to. Gary Payton II is another guy who it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor because of what he provides defensively. Payton was a huge part of the title run in 2022. He was traded back to the Warriors the following deadline. Now, his game is a little bit limited. He is a 6'2" guard who plays bigger than his size suggests, but he's not some outstanding scorer. He's not some outstanding playmaker. One of the worst offensive players on the roster, but also maybe the best defensive player outside of Draymond Green. He can defend multiple positions despite his smaller size. He is making quite a bit of money this year, but he's on the final year of his contract, so if this year doesn't go well, he won't be on the roster next year. We've also got some interesting guys at the end of the bench. Lindy Waters III coming in from Oklahoma City. Decent size, solid spot-up shooter. Nothing really more than that, but given injuries, he is a competent NBA player. Gui Santos, a young guy from Brazil, intriguing upside, probably someone who is stashed in the G League this year. Hopefully we can get him some reps there and maybe he develops. And then Pat Spencer, professional lacrosse player turned hooper. Obviously, considering he's a professional at 2 Sports, the athleticism's obviously got to be quite high, but given that he's only a 68 overall, I'm not entirely sure he's going to have a big role here. So this is what the rotation's going to look like to begin the year, but again, we're going to be very matchup dependent. We may switch guys in and out of the starting lineup depending on who our opponent is, but I think for now, Hield, Kuminga, and Looney will be the regular 3 starters alongside Steph and Draymond, and this is what the bench is going to look like for now. I guess we're going to run 11 deep. That feels a bit much, but I don't really want to sit Anderson or Moody, so that's what we're going to roll with. Next episode, we've got our season opener, ironically against the Trailblazers, a passing of the torch, if you will. And we're probably going to get through a good 2 or 3 weeks in the next episode. So if there's another game here on this schedule that you guys really want to see, let me know down below in the comments. And that'll wrap things up here. I hope you guys enjoyed episode 1 of the Warriors, MyNBA franchise here on NBA 2K25. Again, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Peace out.